What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here, NJ.com. Latest episode of No Huddle Show. We're out here in London. It's nighttime, but the Eagles are going into the bye week right now with the win. They just beat the Jaguars 24-18. It was another intense game. It kind of came down to the end. They built a pretty big lead early on. They went up 17-6, and it started to feel like maybe 17 is their unlucky number. You know, they went up 17-3 against the Titans and lost. They went up 17-0 against the Panthers and lost. But this time they were able to close it out. A lot of things they weren't doing well the last few weeks, they kind of turned it around a little bit. It started off a little sloppy, but they closed it out in the end. And now, I mean, there's a couple injuries they're dealing with, and we'll get into that. But they have to feel better than they did a week ago, certainly. And now they have a week to heal up and go into the bye week.
Yeah, I think it's a positive because you're at 4-4, you're at 500. That's where you want to be. The Eagles were able to deal with some early adversity because Carson Wentz turned the ball over twice in the first quarter, and the defense was able to hold the Jaguars to just 2 field goals in the first half. And I think that is a really good sign for this defense moving forward. They didn't let the adversity of having short fields bother them. I thought the corners played really well in this game. I thought the running backs played very well. I mean, I think overall this was a good, I know you hate the term team win, but I think it was a team win. Like everybody...
Yeah, everything came together.
Everything came together. It was a complete win, if you want to call it.
Complete win, yeah.
Yeah, so, like, I think the Eagles realized, like, their backs were against the wall. And they still are, because the Redskins won.
They're not out of the woods.
Right, yeah, the Redskins won on Sunday. You know...
Yeah, the Redskins are what, 5-2?
Yeah, they've only played 7 games.
That's
so
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and the only way any of these teams are probably making the playoffs is if they win the division. So, you know, the Eagles have played one more game than them. They're going to have a bye week. They'll get to sit back and watch the Redskins play. I really think that's what the division is, the two of them. We'll see what Amari Cooper can do for the Cowboys. But before we get into division talk in the future, let's talk about Carson Wentz. And I know the comment section. Send us your comments. I mean, if you think we're wrong, go ahead and tell us. Carson was the reason why they were losing into the second quarter. That he was the only reason, because the offense was moving very well, the defense was playing very well, and Carson turned the ball over twice.
Yeah.
What I will say is we spoke about mobility in our preview show and said, you know, he's got to find that confidence. And I think he did in this game. After he turned the ball over, he looked like Carson Wentz from last year. He made some incredible throws. But the throw to Joshua Perkins with Jalen Ramsey right near him was a bit of a bonehead decision, it seemed like, or maybe he didn't see Ramsey because Perkins told me after the game that he didn't see him anywhere near him. So, which I think is weird because he looked like he was tightly covered the entire time. I saw it from a mile away.
Get your eyes checked.
Yeah. Obviously the fumbles. I mean, he's fumbled 30 times
He's fumbled every game this year.
Right, and he's lost 5 of them, I believe. So, I mean,
There's a lot that goes into it, but yeah,
it's concerning, especially when you have injuries on the offensive line. So that's what we'll move from Carson Wentz in a second to the offensive line. But I think he really started to feel like his mobility return in this one. Like, he was very elusive in the pocket. He made some heads-up throws. At one point, before his interception, I said Carson Wentz scrambles like Carson Wentz, makes a throw like Carson Wentz, where he was getting spun by a defender and completed it. I forgot who he completed it to, but I give him a B in my ratings, just because, or grades, just because I think that first quarter was pretty damning. Everybody in the press box, and Wembley, you're out in the stands. Everybody
out in the press box.
Right, everybody out in the press box. You can be loud in that press box, and it was just Carson didn't play very well in the first quarter, and that was kind of alarming. Normally in Jaguars games with Blake Bortles, you can tell if they're going to win or lose the game within the first 10 to 12 plays, and it did kind of seem like the Eagles were going to lose this game.
Well, I made myself laugh, which I guess is the most important person to make laugh is yourself.
I don't think that's accurate, but whatever.
But I tweeted like, half serious, like this feels like a Eagles loss.
Yeah.
Like at that, because it just like that's how the Eagles losses tend to go. Like you can kind of feel it early on, and then like a couple plays later, I believe that's when Devontae Maddox forced a turnover. He forced a fumble, and then all of a sudden they scored, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, they turned it around. It's funny though, like that first series, it was like quintessential Carson Wentz in 2018. The first play was deflected to himself, got a catch.
He was Chelsea.
I think the next play or the play after that is when he was he was getting tackled and he found Jordan Matthews, I believe, down the field. And then the first drive was one where he fumbled it away. Yeah, the first drive he fumbled it away. Same play Lane Johnson got injured on, which we'll get into in a second. And then the next possession, interception, and then he just flipped it. He flipped the switch. I mean, it's kind of been the opposite of how it went last week. You know, he started off amazing and ended poorly. It was almost like there's a little carryover from that last series. Maybe he was overthinking a little bit. The crowd, maybe they were taken aback by how loud and big it was because it was a sellout. They had the best crowd they've ever had, is what multiple people have said. But yeah, Carson Wentz is Carson Wentz. He wound up having the pretty similar performance as he's had throughout the season. His numbers are kind of ridiculous if you look at them. I think he's at around like 17 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, like that, or maybe even more touchdowns.
I thought he was at 13-1 or 13-2. Go double check it. You got the computer.
I do have a computer here, right? But I mean, his numbers are kind of insane. Yeah, you're okay. You're right. 13-2. So I mean, that's still pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, if you told me that he was going to finish at like 26-4 after missing the first 2 games, I would say, wow, it's a really good year.
Yeah. But yeah, let's move on to the Lane Johnson thing, which I mentioned. It's the most significant negative thing to come out of this game.
Sure.
He had been dealing with an ankle injury recently. It seemed like it was getting better, but I mean, it was serious enough that I doubt it was completely healed. Mm-hmm. Then after the first series, he had to be carted off. It took a little bit. He went over the trainer's table, but he hurt his knee. We found out later on, and then reports started to emerge that he sprained his MCL with a slight tear, and it seems like the general recovery is like 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, that's pretty significant. They already they have depth issues they have depth issues around the roster, but on the offensive line, there was a point where Jason Peters was out because he was getting tested for concussion. So at that point, you had Halapuli Vaitai in at left tackle. Right, and they moved Isaac Small to right tackle, and they put Steven Wisniewski in at left guard, which meant their only backup offensive lineman at that point was Chance Warmack. Like you and I were like talking about like what's their emergency scenario? Like what happens if another tackle gets hurt? Do they put like Wiz over, and then that means Chance Warmack's playing? So okay, who's the next guy? Like are they putting a tight end at offensive line? Like the way injuries have happened on this team, like it wouldn't have shocked me if they had two more guys get hurt. Like
I think you would move Brandon Brooks to right tackle.
Right tackle, yeah. And then you'd probably be going heavier, like with an extra tight end pretty frequently or something. But it didn't get to that, luckily. But you're going to be in that scenario now going forward where Vaitai is your swing tackle, and his value is as a swing tackle, not as a starter, which is kind of weird to say. But so now he's still going to be starting at right tackle if the reports are true, and he's out as long as they say he's going to be. And then all of a sudden that means you're going to have Jordan Mailata or Matt Pryor on the active roster, and that means they're a play away from playing, and that they're not quite ready for that yet. So this isn't like there's not many good offensive linemen on the trade market because everybody wants good offensive linemen. When you're a good or bad team, you want to keep those guys. And it's not like there's any free agents available unless like freaking Jonathan Ogden has still got something left and he wants to play. Yeah. So there's not really much you can do in terms of personnel, but I mean, how concerned are you about this? Because I think it's pretty big. Historically they win when Lane Johnson plays and they lose when he doesn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I thought Isaac Seumalo played pretty well.
Pretty good the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and then they moved him out to right tackle. I thought he played really well. I would not take Big V off the bench because you never know when Jason Peters is going to get injured. So
you would put Seumalo to right tackle.
Yeah, I'd rather Wisniewski be my fifth starter as opposed to Big V. So. Yeah, it's concerning. I mean, I think Lane's their best offensive lineman, maybe outside of Kelsey. I think Brandon Brooks and Kelsey are now the meat of your offensive line, but yeah, it is concerning. I think because Carson's not just taking hits, he's taking bad hits. He does this thing where he constantly lowers his head and is getting kneed in the helmet or... He needs to stop. I yelled out in the middle, just as a reactionary. I was like,
I heard you because we were outside.
So. Yeah, I go. He needs to stop doing that, man. Yeah. He lowers his head, and it's gonna. I mean, you can hurt your neck, you can hurt your head.
Concussions, man.
And if they lose him, good luck Nick Foles in that pocket. But, again, I think if you give Seumalo time to prepare, like they've said that a couple of times, and he can do it, I think Vaitai the same way. So, I mean, look, the offensive line hasn't played well this season, period. Like, Lane Johnson has not played that well. So, I don't know if it's it's a massive loss, but I don't know if it's going to have a massive impact, depending on how long he's out. And I think Jason Peters, man, he had an okay day. I mean, when he was in there,
another game where I mean, you can't. It's a concussion like that happens in football, but it's just like it keeps piling on.
Yeah, Father Time's trying to tell him like, "Hey, this is your last season, bruh." But yeah, I thought the offensive line played very well given the circumstances.
It started off a little weak, but then they got better as the game went on, for sure.
It's weird. I was never a Seumalo fan. I didn't understand the draft. I understood the draft pick, but I was not a fan. I didn't think he should be starting at guard last year. But he's slowly but surely turned me into a guy who's willing to praise him because I think he's played really well over the last 2 or 3 games.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking earlier with, I think, Ruben Frank about how there's just some guys that the fans just, are mad about no matter what. And he's kind of one of those guys. And it's funny, you don't hear the fans talking about him lately because he's been playing well. But if he gives up another bad sack, then all of a sudden everybody's going to be like, oh, why is he playing? Bench him. But he's just kind of one of those polarizing players. I don't know. Maybe it's because he was so bad last year that he's kind of stuck on everybody's mind. But I don't know. He's been pretty good. And I think he's good enough that you can bring him back next year and be confident that maybe he starts another year on the offensive line.
I think that's the plan, right? Because
that's why otherwise, why would they be keeping him
right
as long as they have?
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, look, I think speaking of the offensive line blocking, I think the tight ends played very well as blockers today. As receivers too. I mean,
Perkins had a nice block in there at one point.
Yeah, he had a couple of good moments in that entire game, but look, I think the tight end group is one of the best two-way groups if not the best trio in the league. I mean, I'm not saying Josh Perkins is like an all-world guy, but he's playing relatively well given his role. I mean, the Goddard, the Wentz to Goddard throw was something else, and then Wentz threw a perfect ball to Zack Ertz in the end zone too. Yeah, so
it was a weirdly quiet day at the office for Ertz.
Yeah,
4 catches, 26 yards, a touchdown, but he got a touchdown.
It felt like he had way more catches than that, but maybe I got to.
He also just has a presence too.
Yeah, Alshon had a pretty okay day, but like we had said coming up into this game, Ramsey was gonna make it so that he wasn't like a focal point. I think.
And you talked about Jordan Matthews and you talked about Aguilar. Aguilar was the one early. They were kind of trying to get him the ball any way they could. He was going slot. He was going deep. He was coming out. He had a carry for 14 yards. But then Matthews he was probably their best receiver.
Yeah, what they did was they put Quentin Meeks, for the most part, on Zack Ertz. And then they had guys rotate around that other corner spot. Sometimes they had Gibson, the safety. Sometimes they had a linebacker. Like, they moved guys around, and the Eagles were able to find mismatches because they ran so much pre-snap motion that it kind of threw the defense off. Another guy that I mentioned that I thought was going to have a really good game is Josh Adams, and he did end up having a pretty good game.
Man, yeah.
9 carries for 61 yards, and he had a 1 catch for 6 yards. He's a guy I'd like to see more of. You wrote a great story on him tonight.
Yeah, you and I were talking about this, and this is mentioned in my story. I was just thinking, like, not even necessarily in terms of his running style, though I do think he's similar. I just kept thinking, like, he could be their next LeGarrette Blount, whether that's right now or, like, down the line. He gets yards in chunks. He gets them when they need him the most. He runs powerfully. And I don't know, he seems pretty reliable. I mean, I pulled a stat. I think he has 5 carries of 9 or 10 yards or more this season, which is only 1 less than Wendell Smallwood and the same amount as Corey Clement, and he has half the carries of those guys. And that just tells you that he gets big plays. He doesn't really lose yards usually. I think he's only lost yards once or twice this season. I think you come out of that thinking, like, okay, maybe we don't need, they do this every other week, it feels like, but maybe they don't need to trade for a running back. Like, we were talking about how they need guys with different skill sets to complement each other, and it almost feels like Corey Clement's kind of fallen by the wayside. He's run pretty poorly the last 2 weeks, 12 carries for 12 yards. But Smallwood seems like he's developed into a pretty good pass catcher. And Josh Adams is maybe your short yards, chunk yardage guy. Can get a big play when you need him to. And then you have Clement there who can do a little bit of everything. I mean, I know it's just one game, but I mean, he was showing these flashes in training camp. And that game against the Colts, I believe, where he had like 6 carries for 30 yards. He had like a 15-yard rush that day. I'm pretty encouraged by him, honestly, and he looks the part too. Like he's a big dude. He's like 6'3" and 214.
I think the concern is more of his ability to pass block.
Yeah, that's going to be the hang up with him, and that's probably why he hasn't gotten on the field, honestly.
Well, I mean, Wendell Smallwood's had some issues there too. Yeah, I mean, I like this 3-man rotation. Would I settle for it? Probably not. But, I mean, I think if Josh Adams can emerge, we've seen running back's a position where you can get an undrafted guy and he balls right away. And I think that's, I
think they have other bigger needs.
For sure. I still think they need an out. I mean, look, Jordan Matthews had a great game today. A great game. It was a great game.
I would still get a receiver.
I would still get a receiver. I mean, they need corner help for sure. We'll get
especially because Jalen Mills left
foot injury.
Claimed to be okay, but that doesn't always mean anything.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed to be in a good mood too. So, but who knows?
J.J. talked like a whole interview and demanded the ball, and then he had a torn ACL.
Yeah, I don't know. That could be mafia related
situation. Yeah, like what's it called? Tanya Harding.
Yeah,
somebody taking out his knee.
Yeah. So
we're not conspiracy theorists.
Yeah. So we talked about the wide receivers. We talked about the tight ends. We talked about pretty much the whole offense.
I mean, how would you? I think. Overall, I thought the whole offense because they did better. They started off in the red zone. Those first 2 drives were in the red zone, and they didn't score.
I thought Doug Peterson called a pretty good game.
He had one of his best games of the season, maybe since the Falcons game.
They saw something on tape that because what I said before the game is if you attack them across the middle and you force mismatches against their lesser coverage unit, you can be successful. Also, running the ball helps. And I had several pundits question that. Now, that said, they did all those things. And I think Doug saw something on film that said, wow, the pre-snap read really tricks them. Kind of like with Jalen Mills and Ronald Darby, how they bite on double moves. There's stuff on tape where you can see guys' instincts, you can see guys' tendencies, and I think, they did a lot of misdirection on offense and defense, but we'll get into the defensive part later. I just think a lot of the pre-snap reads with Nelson Aguilar really set them up for success, especially in the running game. I just feel like overall this was a really strong game for Doug. It was an okay game for Jim Schwartz as we get onto the defense. I think he had 2 down and distance coverage issues where he gave up yardage that led to field goals because they were able to pick up just enough to get in range. Josh Lambo kicked a 57-yard field goal, career high. He's also 100% on the season.
That's crazy. Well, and you talked about how they were getting on the field. Like, it seems like the offense and defense are almost never in sync on this team. Like, towards the end, they were. But the Eagles had like a 90-yard scoring drive, and then the Jaguars came back and had a 75-yard scoring drive, and then the Eagles had a 70-yard scoring drive, and then the Jaguars went 69 yards up the field and kicked that field goal. So that's kind of been the issue all season. That's kind of where I was like, I still think they might lose this game. Like they might screw this up. I mean, wasn't that when the Eagles score, the defense needs to be able to get the offense off the field. I know they're not always in a great position, but like,
well, the Eagles are now -5 in turnover differential. At one point, they were -6 because Avonte Maddox hadn't forced the fumble yet. Just as much as it's the offense turning the ball over, you really do need to create turnovers in this league. Quarterbacks are too good now that you can't just let them, have the ball in their hands for drive after drive. You have to take it away. And I think the Eagles got the one turnover that they needed. They still lost the turnover battle, but they're clearly the better team, so they made up for it. Defensive line-wise, I thought this was Chris Long's best game that he's played in a very long time.
Finally got through for a sack, first time since week 1.
Yeah, I thought Jordan Hicks was really good till he gave up the wheel route to TJ Yeldon. I thought Nigel Bradham played pretty well.
Let's focus on the D-line, though.
Yeah, Bennett...
didn't have as dominant of a game as he's had recently in the first quarter.
Yeah, he got a half sack.
Yeah,
Good for him. Mazel tov.
D-line was pretty good overall. They weren't like finishing a lot of shots.
Yeah, I mean, the Jaguars ran for 70 yards, and most of those yards were by Blake Bortles. So
probably more on like the linebackers and those guys, right?
Well, I think it's the front. I would say the front seven. Fletcher Cox made like 2 ridiculous run stops in this game.
I will say Brandon Graham looks like he's just not the same player. Like, at least athletically, he just like can't catch guys, and he can get past offensive linemen. But there was like early on, there's a play where Blake Bortles ran, and he was just like dragging behind him. It's not like Bortles is like crazy fast.
Yeah, I mean, he's in an interesting spot in his career where I think he'd probably be best served as a hard rotational player as opposed to the starter,
like pass rusher or something. Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think he's
whatever.
Yeah. Right. So, but yeah, defensive line overall, I thought played pretty well.
Did Josh Sweat really play today?
Yeah, he was actually in on a 4th down play. I don't think he really contributed that much, but
he didn't play as many snaps as we thought he was going to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to wait and see with him because he's a guy
you get the bye week to get him acclimated a little more and
right.
In the rotation.
And Chris Long and Mike Bennett played pretty well throughout the game. So most teams only rotate 3 DNs. So Schwartz is kind of a unique cat where he has platoons. I mean, the Jaguars do that too. But the linebackers, Jordan Hicks was having the best game probably in a couple of years, and then he allowed that wheel route. I mean, look, it's one play, but man, did Yeldon beat him bad. Bradham's been a guy who's just kind of there. He's just done his job, which is probably
anything bad. Doesn't do anything great. He just does
He just does his job, which is fine. At one point, Camus, Grugier Hill suffered a thumb injury. Luckily,
he had like a big old club on his hand.
Yeah, luckily he came back because they were down to really like Leroy Reynolds and DJ Alexander, both of whom I would not probably want out on defense. This was not the Mike Kaye Bowl. This was the Leroy Reynolds revenge game, and he got the win. But corner, like I said, I thought they played relatively well. There were a couple of mishaps. Dexter McDougal,
he had a bad play.
Yeah, there was a 24-yard gain by Moncrief. Most of the big gains were by tight ends or by running backs. It wasn't by wide receivers.
Jalen Mills was pretty good today.
Yeah, I thought Jalen Mills played well. I thought Ronald Darby was having one of his better games. That hit that he put on DJ Chark, in the fourth quarter, that was tone-setting.
I mean, Jalen Mills before he went down, I should say, and then Rasul. What'd you make of his day?
He had a really bad whiff on a run.
He made a good stop late in the game, so it seemed like he got more comfortable as the game went along.
Yeah, he strikes me as a guy who has to find his rhythm, but he had a really important pass breakup on 3rd and 1. They targeted him pretty regularly.
Right away, you could see them. Blake wasn't even thinking about where the ball was going. He threw it in that direction.
Right, that first play, I actually asked him about that. I go, if he throws that ball in any other place, that's an interception, right? And he's like, yeah, it's a pick. He had to overthrow him. And I go, well, all right, well, because he did run stride for stride with the receiver. Look, I think Rasul Douglas is a very talented player. I've said that several times on this podcast. I just don't know if you're ever going to overcome the Jalen Mills, teacher's pet factor. And I think Jalen Mills is a lot better than most people give him credit for, but, at some point you're going to have to say, hey, do we want Sidney Jones on the outside in the next couple of years?
Sidney Jones is ever healthy.
Yeah, do we want Rasul Douglas? Because Rasul Douglas has ideal starter boundary corner written all over him. It's just a matter of whether you think he can do it. Malcolm Jenkins had him speak to the team, the defensive backs, on Saturday.
That was interesting, yeah.
Yeah, they have a lot of respect for Rasul, and I think Rasul is a guy who's a very team-first dude. You saw Sidney Jones say, hey, great team win on Twitter, and then Rasul quote-tweeted him and said, hey, man, get back soon. He was joking around with Shandon Sullivan in the locker room about how he got 2 snaps and how it was a big deal. He's a good dude, a good dude for the locker room. He's not complaining. He's kind of accepted his role. I'm not sure what that tweet was about the other day, where he was you can't replace him.
In retrospect now.
Yeah, I think he's a guy. He's a young kid who's been through a lot, and he hasn't been in practice a lot lately. Yeah. I asked him about that, and he said, we all go through things, and I think Rasul's handled this relatively well. Because to me, it's ludicrous this guy doesn't play. Because every time he's in there, he makes a play. Yeah, sure, sometimes he'll whiff on a tackle like he did, or sometimes he'll...
But they're not even, giving him the opportunity to grow from his mistakes. Was the biggest problem I had with it. Like, clearly he got better as the night went along, which just makes me even think even more, like, give him a few snaps every week. Like, I
just think, like, you're running a fool's errand if you have Dexter McDougal out there being your starting nickel. Just move Jalen Mills inside. Like, or Darby, even. Darby had a really good game today.
You don't even blame McDougal whenever he makes a mistake, because it's like he has no business being out there anyway.
Right, he's somebody's nephew, probably.
Chance Warmack and him are...
yeah, they'll get an award during the mid-season point, probably. So why are you here? No, I'm just kidding. Moving on to safety. So this was the best safety game up until...
Malcolm had a bad whiff on, I think, the D.D. Westbrook touchdown.
Yeah, that's an impossible match. D.D. Westbrook's got such fast feet.
I mean,
like,
he just whiffed. Like, this is reality.
Right, sure. Malcolm made a couple of really big run stops. He's just good. He's probably the most consistent player on this entire team, outside of maybe Zack because of the pace he's on. But they've got somebody in Avonte Maddox.
Man,
this kid's a player. Like,
he keeps getting better.
Yeah,
that play he made was so good. The forced fumble.
Yeah. Well, also keep in mind Keelan Cole's really struggles with drops.
I get it, but he still made for a rookie.
Oh yeah, I'm not hating on him at all. And I said to myself, they got to create a turnover here. This game's done.
They haven't created turnovers like all season. Like that was a huge. You could feel it. That's where
the momentum.
That was right after I said it feels like a loss. Then I quote tweeted and I was like, it feels like a win.
But prior to doing that, he made a great play on 3rd and 1 where they ran Carlos Hyde, who probably outweighs him by roughly 30 pounds. And he just stopped him in the backfield for no gain. I was really impressed by that. He is really developing very well. His instincts are fantastic. They started to get a little tricky with him where they would disguise coverages where he would play single high, and then when they would blitz, he would branch out last second and cover a wide receiver. That's what he allows you to do, and I think that's what Rodney McLeod allowed you to do, have that kind of cornerback-like skills to cover, but also be able to hit. And he told me after the game, that he really likes to hit, he really likes to tackle. This is a guy that came in as an undersized nickel corner and has really become
a good safety.
He's rewarding them. Like, this draft class, on paper is interesting, but
they might not need a draft a safety now. Like, if they just decide he's permanently a safety, like.
I mean, who knows? But
tired, huh?
Yeah, sorry, man. Sorry for that.
It's real.
Yeah, this jet lag has been hard to get over. Sorry to yawn in the middle of a podcast. I'm sure you guys are really having a grand old time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this guy's a player. I think Josh Adams is a player too. I think Josh Sweat.
If you count Josh Adams as part of the 2017 class, you have 3 guys that have already shown that they're good enough to be in the league.
Yeah.
You have a guy in Josh Sweat who we both agree has the potential to be really something, and Jordan Mailata is the biggest wild card in this draft. So
yeah, I mean, I think if you can teach him, he's got all the physical tools.
Yeah. And
so
if you hit on one of him and Pryor, then that means you're almost a 90% success rate. Like,
right. So I mean, again, I think this is. I've said this before in the podcast. I don't believe you suffer from a bad draft class until the second year. I feel the same way about successful drafts. Like, you don't really get to experience the success until the next year. They really like Avonte Maddox. And honestly, I like Avonte Maddox. I talked to him in the locker room. That dude's got the right attitude. He's a tough as nails little dude.
I mean, he was having a great time with the kids the other day. He was like running around with them.
Maddox loves the kids. Special teams.
Not that much to talk about there.
Yeah, there was a PAT that looked like a miss, but it wasn't a miss.
I was like, he missed it.
Yeah, I'm like, no, check out the score, bro.
Sometimes you can't tell with the way it,
oh my god, the sun in that
especially the
effing stadium. I the first quarter. Not that I want to complain on this podcast,
but
I couldn't see anything. I don't know.
It looks like Cameron Johnson averaged 51 yards a punt.
51.7.
None inside the 20, but I mean, he was good enough.
He was. He's a guy that you like because he can kick distance. I just don't know if he's very good at targeting a spot and really just putting it down.
I can't really remember many where you're like, oh man,
That's a great punt,
Yeah. But he'll boom them. Return-wise, Corey Clement had one kick return for 17 yards.
Yeah, and I don't know what he saw in there, because it looked like he had tons of space, and then he just kind of ran into
no, there's a lot of space to the right or whatever it was, and then they had one punt return for no yards. But, I mean, I think they're okay with DeAndre Carter at return. If Darren Sproles comes back, then you have a couple guys. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, special teams, I mean, not much to be worried about there.
So, 7th inactive game for Darren Sproles. We have to talk about this.
I mean, he wasn't even in London. He was back home.
Right. I don't
get it.
If he doesn't play Week 10 in Dallas,
put him on IR. Stop playing around.
I mean, they should have put him on IR by Week 5 and just said, hey, let's run with... It's just, I don't know, it's silly to me.
Hanging on to something that just doesn't exist anymore.
I mean, I get it. You want the feel-good stuff. I'm all for it. But, look.
You gotta win.
And the thing is, though, now if you put him on IR, then it's like you're ending a season, pretty much.
Well, I mean, he'd have to be out for, 8 weeks. He would be back in week 16 in theory anyway, so.
No, you have to miss 8 games.
8 games.
And there's only 8 games left.
So he wouldn't even play anyway, yeah.
Right, so now you've put yourself in a position.
He's not going to play, that's the point.
Right, I mean, you've put him into this position. Corey Graham's hamstring injury is lingering too. I mean, Sidney Jones is probably going to miss a couple more games, if I had to guess. Look, everybody's banged up. The Jaguars were banged up. I mean, the Jaguars lost several players in this game too.
Yeah, it felt like every 10 minutes we were getting updates about somebody.
Right, and I think, just tying this into a bow, this isn't last year's Eagles team. Don't expect last year's Eagles team, but that said, they proved that they were resilient today, and I think that that's worth taking into account. At 4-4, their season's not over. I think the playoff outlook is very, very, very real. I don't think the Redskins are as good. I mean, they've got Adrian Peterson and Alex Smith, two guys who historically, over the last couple of years, have kind of fallen off a cliff later in the season. And I think, wide receiver is an extremely important position, but it's not going to... Amari Cooper's not Terrell Owens. You know what I mean? So I think you have to feel pretty okay if you're the Eagles. I mean, this was not a convincing win, but it was a solid win.
It'd be nice to see a convincing win against a halfway decent team because the Giants aren't very good. But
right,
for your and my sanity, where we don't know if we're gonna have to delete everything we just wrote and redo it at the last second, because they've had a lot of those games recently.
Hashtag writer life,
especially. Deadline life. But yeah, I think that's a good point to wrap up on. Trade deadlines on Tuesday. Hopefully we'll be able to get a podcast at some point, either Tuesday or Wednesday or later in the week. Some logistical problems we're dealing with from us being in different locations, but we're gonna try our best to get you one. Thank you guys for listening. Leave some comments on YouTube. Write a review. We'll start reading those out more, and hopefully the Eagles have a nice and exciting trade deadline that we can react to. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys.